Motivation is not magic. It's not something you're born with, or something that just appears when the stars align. Motivation is a process, a biological, psychological, and behavioral process that you can control. Today, I want to show you how to increase your motivation, not someday, not in theory, but in a way that is grounded in neuroscience and applicable right now. Whether you're trying to get in shape, finish a project, or change your life, what you're really asking is, how do I activate myself? How do I drive forward when I feel stuck? We're going to explore the neurochemicals that govern drive, how your environment and behaviors shape your will to act, and most importantly, how to trigger motivation even when you don't feel like it. Because here's the truth, you don't need to feel motivated to act. You need to act to feel motivated. Motivation begins in the brain, and if we want to understand how to increase it, we have to understand the underlying neurochemistry that drives it. At the heart of motivation lies a powerful molecule, dopamine. Often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, dopamine is not primarily about feeling good, it's about driving action. It's the molecule of pursuit, of anticipation, of wanting. When dopamine levels rise in specific circuits of the brain, especially in areas like the mesolimbic pathway, what follows is a surge in focus, energy, and a readiness to act. This is key because it means that motivation is not something abstract or mystical. It is a concrete, measurable process governed by real biology. Dopamine is released in response to rewards, but more interestingly, it's also released in anticipation of rewards. In fact, the largest spikes in dopamine don't happen after we accomplish something, but right before when we believe we're about to make progress. This has massive implications for how we structure our goals and our habits. If you can learn to create a sense of forward momentum, your brain will reward you with more dopamine, and that dopamine will drive more action, which creates a self-reinforcing cycle of motivation and effort. This is why progress, no matter how small, is so powerful. It tells your brain, we're getting closer, and the brain responds by giving you more fuel to keep going. The source of dopamine also matters. There are healthy ways to stimulate it, and there are unhealthy ones. Drugs like cocaine and amphetamines hijack the dopamine system by artificially flooding the brain with this molecule, which leads to a short-term high and a long-term crash. Natural methods, however, like achieving goals, experiencing novelty, engaging in challenging work, stimulate dopamine in a sustainable way that builds lasting motivation. What's more, you can train your brain to find these natural experiences more rewarding over time. Another fascinating aspect of the dopamine system is that it's incredibly sensitive to balance. If you overindulge in dopamine-releasing behaviors, binge watching, overuse of social media, junk food, you can actually cause the baseline level of dopamine in your brain to drop. When that happens, things that used to feel exciting or motivating suddenly feel flat. This is one reason why people often feel unmotivated despite having a goal. Their dopamine system is fatigued. One way to recover from this is through what's called dopamine fasting, taking intentional breaks from overstimulating behaviors to allow your brain's baseline levels to reset. It's not about deprivation, it's about recalibration. Dopamine also interacts with other systems in the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, which governs planning and decision-making. When dopamine levels are optimal, the prefrontal cortex functions more efficiently, allowing you to stay on task, resist distractions, and make choices that align with long-term goals. This synergy between the motivational and executive systems of the brain is what enables consistent goal-directed behavior. It's not just about wanting to do something, it's about having the neurological scaffolding to actually follow through. The incredible part is that dopamine is not fixed. You can learn to modulate it through your behaviors. Cold exposure, physical exercise, goal setting, novelty seeking, even certain breathing techniques, all of these have been shown to increase dopamine in the brain in ways that support motivation. And the more you understand these tools, the more agency you gain over your own drive. You are not at the mercy of low energy or lack of willpower. You are working with a system, one that you can learn to harness. So when we talk about increasing motivation, we're really talking about learning to manage dopamine, when to release it, how to protect it, and how to use it to fuel sustained effort. This is not just a motivational idea, it's neuroscience. And when you understand that, you can begin to apply these principles to anything in your life, from fitness to focus to career, because the biology of motivation is universal. The brain doesn't care what the goal is, it just wants to pursue. And the better you get at triggering that pursuit, the more motivated and fulfilled you'll become. One of the most powerful ways to increase motivation is to set specific, measurable goals. This may sound obvious, but the neuroscience behind it reveals why it's not just useful, it's essential. The brain thrives on clarity. When we define exactly what we want to achieve, we activate specific neural circuits involved in planning, decision-making, and reward prediction. This engages the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, allowing us to track progress, stay focused, and avoid distractions. In contrast, vague goals such as "I want to be healthier" or "I want to do better" lack the structure needed for the brain to determine how to allocate effort, and this lack of clarity results in a lack of motivation. When you define a goal clearly, such as "I want to run 3 times a week for 30 minutes, or "I want to finish reading 1 chapter of a book each day," you're giving your brain a concrete target. This is critical because the dopamine system doesn't just respond to rewards, it responds to the anticipation of reaching a defined outcome. With a specific goal, your brain can begin to model success, projecting forward into the future and preparing your physiology to pursue that outcome. The more vivid and detailed the target, the more likely your brain is to release dopamine during the pursuit, not just upon completion. Another key aspect is measurability. The brain needs feedback. It needs to know whether progress is being made, and when goals are measurable, that feedback loop is built in. Imagine you're climbing a staircase, but can't see the steps or know how many are left. That uncertainty drains motivation. But when each step is visible, and you know how far you've come, the brain interprets this as success and reinforces the behavior. Every measurable milestone achieved acts as a mini reward, spiking dopamine and fueling further action. This is why people who track their progress, whether it's through journaling, apps, or simple checklists, tend to stay more consistent and motivated over time. The act of seeing progress, even in small amounts, is neurochemically reinforcing. Specificity also helps eliminate decision fatigue. When you know exactly what needs to be done, the mental friction involved in getting started is reduced. You don't have to figure it out each time, you just follow the plan. This preserves cognitive energy and helps reduce procrastination, which often occurs when tasks are ambiguous. Instead of your brain spinning its wheels trying to determine what to do next, it switches into execution mode. Furthermore, when goals are clear and measurable, they allow for better emotional regulation. Uncertainty breeds anxiety, and anxiety suppresses motivation. When you're unsure about what you're doing or why you're doing it, the limbic system, the emotional brain, can override the prefrontal cortex, leading to avoidance behaviors. But when there's a clearly defined target, anxiety is reduced, and emotional energy can be channeled into focused effort. You know what success looks like, and that knowledge is calming to the nervous system. There's also a deeper psychological effect. Specific, measurable goals signal commitment to yourself. When you write down or declare a precise intention, you're engaging in what psychologists call a pre-commitment strategy. This increases your sense of responsibility, strengthens identity around the behavior, and activates internal motivation. You begin to see yourself not just as someone trying to do something, but as someone who does that thing. That identity shift is powerful and self-reinforcing. Finally, specific and measurable goals allow for better adaptation. When things aren't working, you can see it more clearly, and you have the data to pivot. Without specificity, it's hard to know whether the lack of progress is due to effort, strategy, or external circumstances. With clear targets, you can troubleshoot, refine your approach, and make adjustments that keep you moving forward. In essence, the brain is like a GPS system. It needs a destination. If you input vague directions, you get lost. But if you tell it exactly where you're going, how far you've come, and how close you are, it responds by giving you the motivation to get there. Clarity is not just a productivity tool, it is a biological requirement for sustained effort and motivation. The more precise you are with your goals, the more powerfully your brain will work to help you achieve them. The anticipation of a reward is far more powerful in driving motivation than the reward itself. And this is a core principle of how the dopamine system in the brain functions. When we think of motivation, we often imagine that it comes from achieving something, from the moment we cross the finish line, receive the promotion, or finally hit the goal we've been working toward. But in reality, the biggest spike in dopamine, the neurochemical that energizes and directs our behavior, happens before we reach the goal. It happens in the moments when we believe we're making progress, when we sense that we are moving forward, when we are anticipating success just ahead of us. This is where the power of structuring your goals into smaller, manageable tasks comes in. When we break a large, distant goal into micro-tasks or mini milestones, we create more opportunities for the brain to release dopamine throughout the process. Each time we complete one of those small steps, the brain registers it as progress, and we get a little dopamine reward. That reward doesn't just feel good, it serves a functional purpose. It fuels further action. It tells the brain, whatever you just did, do more of that. This is what builds momentum. And momentum is the psychological and biological state where motivation becomes self-reinforcing. Think of this like climbing a mountain. If the only time you felt successful or rewarded was when you reached the peak, your energy and enthusiasm would fade quickly, especially if the journey is long and difficult. But if along the way there were clear markers, small flags indicating you've gone another 100 meters, checkpoints where you could rest and acknowledge progress, you would feel encouraged. Your motivation would stay high because your brain is continually getting signals that your efforts matter. This is the dopamine anticipation effect in action. It's the brain saying, we're close, keep going, and it pushes you forward with more energy and focus. The anticipation of reaching each milestone builds a sense of purpose and direction. When we engage in a task and can visualize ourselves nearing the next step, dopamine is released in areas like the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, regions associated with motivation and reward-seeking behavior. These areas don't respond passively. They actually light up with activity as soon as we perceive we're getting closer to something we value. This activity then signals the motor systems of the brain to keep moving, to keep acting, to keep striving. It's a beautifully orchestrated feedback loop that keeps us engaged and driven. The crucial point here is that you don't need to wait until the finish line to feel rewarded or motivated. You can create these feelings intentionally by designing your goals in a way that generates consistent progress markers. For example, instead of saying, I want to write a book, you might break that into write 500 words today and then celebrate the completion of that task. That celebration can be internal, it doesn't have to be external or dramatic. Even simply acknowledging that you did what you said you would do creates a sense of accomplishment that the brain registers as meaningful. That in turn increases the likelihood that you'll return to the task tomorrow. This approach also protects against burnout. When we wait for only the final reward, our system can become depleted. The brain gets tired, motivation drops, and we start to question whether the effort is worth it. But when you build anticipation into your system through incremental goals, you keep the motivational engine running steadily. You create a structure where energy is continually renewed rather than depleted. It becomes easier to show up even on days when you're tired or distracted, because your brain is conditioned to seek and expect that small reward from daily progress. Additionally, this method of structuring and anticipating rewards helps rewire the brain to enjoy the process, not just the outcome. Over time, your nervous system begins to associate effort with pleasure, not because the work is always easy, but because it's consistently followed by progress. And progress, when it's clearly visible, is one of the most potent motivators known to science. This shift where the process becomes rewarding is what transforms a habit into a lifestyle and a temporary effort into a sustainable identity. Ultimately, the goal is to become someone who doesn't just chase big dreams occasionally, but someone who is neurologically wired to enjoy and seek daily progress. That shift requires intentionally feeding your dopamine system the anticipation it needs to stay engaged. By designing your workflow to include frequent progress points and celebrating them, you create a brain environment that is primed for motivation, resilience, and consistency, not just for the next few days, but potentially for life. One of the most overlooked yet powerful tools for increasing motivation is something incredibly simple and always available to us: our visual system. The way we use our eyes, what we look at, how we focus, and how we direct our gaze has a profound effect on our brain and body's readiness to take action. When you narrow your field of vision and engage in what's known as visual focus, you're not just looking, you're signaling to your brain that something important is happening and that it's time to prepare for movement, effort, or attention. This isn't just a metaphor, it's a biological reality. The visual system is deeply integrated with the parts of the brain that regulate arousal and motivation, particularly through the autonomic nervous system. When you narrow your focus, literally, when you look at a single object or point, especially one that's far away or meaningful to you, you activate the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. This is the branch associated with alertness, readiness, and forward movement. In contrast, when your gaze is relaxed, soft, and panoramic, you activate the parasympathetic system, which promotes calm, rest, and recovery. Understanding this mechanism is critical because it means that you can control your internal state by manipulating your external focus. When you're trying to get yourself into a state of high motivation to write, to train, to study, to pursue a goal, you can deliberately use your eyes to shift your brain and body into the correct mode. Narrowing your visual focus mimics the natural response your body would have when you're pursuing something in the environment, like tracking prey or chasing an opportunity. It signals to your brain, this is important, pay attention. Move forward. This results in the release of neuromodulators like norepinephrine, which heighten alertness and prepare you for action. There's something even more fascinating here. Our ancestors used this system for survival. In threatening or high-stakes situations, their eyes would automatically narrow and fixate on the source of the challenge, whether that was an approaching predator, a falling tree, or a target in the distance. That act of narrowing the visual field initiated a cascade of neural and physiological changes designed to help them act with speed, power, and precision. Today we can leverage this same ancient mechanism in our modern lives. When you intentionally narrow your visual focus on a specific goal, like looking at your to-do list, your notes, or a single point of attention, you're sending the same signal to your brain, it's time to move. This isn't limited to just mental tasks. Athletes use this all the time without even realizing it. When they focus on a target, a finish line, or a point in the distance, their visual focus helps prime their body for motion. It sharpens their movements, increases their reaction speed, and reduces distractions. The same can be applied to any form of productivity. When you want to get started on a task but feel sluggish or unfocused, simply changing your visual behavior, moving from a wide passive gaze to a narrow focused one, can be enough to kickstart motivation and momentum. This principle also helps explain why distractions are so destructive to motivation. When our gaze is constantly shifting, checking our phone, glancing at tabs, looking around the room, we're keeping the brain in a low arousal scanning mode. It's the opposite of goal-directed focus. Without realizing it, we dilute the signal that tells our brain to get to work. On the other hand, when we eliminate visual noise and orient ourselves toward one clear point of attention, we amplify the brain's ability to sustain effort. This is why many high performers will physically design their environments to minimize distractions and create visual clarity. They're not just organizing space, they're organizing their nervous system for peak motivation. There's also a psychological element at play. When we look directly at something and hold our gaze, we increase our sense of connection and intention. Think about what happens when someone maintains eye contact in a conversation. It feels more real, more serious. The same applies to goal pursuit. When you lock your eyes onto the page, the screen, or the path ahead, you reinforce a sense of commitment. Your brain interprets your gaze as a statement, this matters. That interpretation is then mirrored in your physiological state, creating a loop between intention and activation. Furthermore, the connection between the visual system and the brain's motivational networks is not just top-down, it's reciprocal. In other words, what you look at shapes how you feel, and how you feel shapes what you're inclined to look at. By taking control of your visual behavior, you take control of the first step in this motivational loop. It becomes a way of asserting agency over your state of mind and body, even when you don't feel like taking action. You can use your eyes to initiate movement before your thoughts or emotions catch up. In moments of low motivation or mental fatigue, this becomes a powerful tool. Instead of waiting for the perfect feeling to begin, you can simply begin by focusing your vision. Fix your eyes on a point related to your goal, hold that focus, let your nervous system respond. Over time, this practice conditions the brain to associate that type of focus with readiness and drive. It becomes an internal cue, a signal that says, this is what we do when we're serious. This is how we begin. So while motivation often feels abstract or elusive, visual focus offers a concrete physical entry point. It bypasses the need for inspiration and goes straight to the circuits that control energy, action, and attention. It's not a hack, it's a fundamental aspect of how human beings are wired to interact with the world. And once you learn to use it deliberately, it becomes one of the simplest, fastest, and most reliable ways to switch on the motivational systems of the brain. One of the most profound and scientifically grounded strategies to increase motivation is the use of deliberate cold exposure. While it might seem counterintuitive to seek out discomfort, this practice taps directly into the brain-body systems responsible for drive, alertness, and energy. The human nervous system evolved to respond to cold as a signal to act, to move, to generate heat, and to survive. And this ancient biological response can be harnessed to generate motivation in a very modern context. When you expose yourself to cold, whether it's through cold showers, ice baths, or other forms of cold immersion, your body experiences a rapid and powerful activation of the sympathetic nervous system. This is the same system responsible for the fight or flight response. It ramps up alertness, increases heart rate, and floods the brain with neuromodulators like norepinephrine and dopamine. These chemicals are not just associated with stress, they are also key drivers of mental clarity, mood elevation, and sustained motivation. What's especially remarkable is that cold exposure doesn't just cause a small bump in dopamine. Research shows that dopamine levels can rise by up to 250% following cold immersion, and even more importantly, those elevated levels can remain high for several hours afterward. This extended elevation is rare in neuroscience and represents a unique opportunity, a natural, healthy way to shift your internal state into one of high energy and drive, without the crash that typically follows artificial stimulants. The experience of cold exposure also conditions your brain to become more resilient. Each time you willingly step into the discomfort of the cold, you're engaging in an act of controlled stress. And in doing so, you train the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and willpower, to override the limbic system, which governs emotion and avoidance. This strengthens your ability to choose action in the face of resistance. It builds what psychologists call top-down control, meaning that your higher-order thinking can guide your behavior even when your body or emotions say no. This is the essence of motivation, the ability to act in the direction of your goals, despite internal or external obstacles. There's also a deeper psychological transformation that happens with cold exposure. You begin to shift your relationship with discomfort. Most of us are conditioned to avoid anything unpleasant, but when you repeatedly expose yourself to cold in a safe, deliberate way, you learn that discomfort is not dangerous. In fact, it becomes something you can tolerate, even master. This mental reframe is powerful. Suddenly, other challenging things, whether it's a hard workout, a difficult conversation, or a demanding project, don't seem as intimidating. You've already proven to yourself through the cold that you can handle stress and still move forward. That confidence generalizes into other areas of life, creating a broader sense of internal strength and readiness. Cold exposure also creates a moment of decisive action. When you're standing in front of a cold shower or preparing for an ice bath, everything in your body resists. There's hesitation. The mind wants to delay, but the act of stepping into the cold becomes a powerful metaphor for breaking through inertia. It becomes a daily ritual of courage, a moment where you teach yourself again and again that you don't have to wait for motivation to act. You can act first and let motivation follow. This pattern of behavior rewires your brain. Over time, the neural circuits associated with avoidance weaken, while those tied to action and discipline grow stronger. You become the kind of person who moves toward challenge rather than away from it. The beauty of this practice is that it's simple and accessible. You don't need special equipment. You don't need to wait for the perfect day. You can start with something as basic as turning the shower to cold for 30 seconds at the end of your morning routine. The key is consistency. It's the regular repetition of choosing discomfort in a controlled setting that builds the internal scaffolding for motivation. Each session becomes a tiny victory, a signal to your nervous system that you are not ruled by emotion or convenience. You are capable of conscious, directed effort, and that is the very essence of motivation. Importantly, the benefits of cold exposure are not just physical. Yes, it enhances circulation, immune response, and inflammation control, but at a neurochemical level, it fundamentally shifts your internal environment. It primes your brain for effort, increases your ability to stay focused, and improves your resilience to future stress. These are not just traits of physical toughness, they are core ingredients of sustained high-level motivation. In a world full of distractions and comfort, deliberately stepping into the cold becomes an anchor, a reliable, repeatable way to reconnect with your drive. It's not about punishing the body, it's about awakening the systems that evolution designed to help us pursue, to strive, to overcome. And when done consistently, it serves as a daily reset button, reminding your brain and body that you are capable of far more than you think. It teaches you to act not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. And that, perhaps more than anything else, is the gateway to true lasting motivation. Movement is one of the most powerful and direct ways to shift the state of your brain and body toward motivation. It is not just about exercise or fitness, it is about tapping into a deep evolutionary mechanism that links physical motion with mental readiness, emotional energy, and the neurochemical conditions for sustained drive. From a neuroscience perspective, the connection between movement and motivation is not a loose association, it is a tightly integrated loop. When you move your body, you activate brain systems that are responsible for initiating effort, reinforcing action, and sustaining engagement over time. At the core of this loop is the relationship between the body's motor system and the brain's dopaminergic pathways. These pathways are the ones responsible for desire, pursuit, and pleasure. When you initiate physical movement, particularly intentional and goal-directed movement, like walking with a purpose, engaging in resistance training, sprinting, or even simple rhythmic movements like bouncing your heels while standing, you stimulate the release of dopamine. This is not a side effect, it is a central function. Dopamine is often misunderstood as just a chemical of pleasure, but in reality, it is a chemical of motivation. It is what gets you to pursue something, to engage, to chase, to strive. What's even more interesting is that the brain doesn't wait until you've completed a workout or hit a milestone to release dopamine. Dopamine begins to increase simply when movement starts, particularly if that movement is voluntary and directed. This means that if you're feeling stuck, unmotivated, or mentally foggy, the fastest way to change your mental state is to begin moving, even if that movement feels small or insignificant at first. This is why many high performers instinctively go for a walk, jump on a bike, or do a quick set of push-ups when they feel their motivation dipping. It's not just about burning calories, it's about activating a neurochemical state that supports action. There is also a profound link between movement and what is known as the readiness state of the body. When you move, your body temperature rises slightly, your heart rate increases, and your blood circulation improves. This change in internal physiology sends signals to the brain that it's time to be alert, time to pay attention, and time to engage. In contrast, when you are sedentary for long periods, your physiology slips into a passive, energy-conserving mode. The longer you stay in that passive state, the harder it is to generate the momentum needed to begin. This is why motivation often feels elusive when you're still, but begins to emerge naturally once you start moving. There's also a powerful psychological feedback loop that emerges when you use movement to generate motivation. Each time you overcome the resistance to start moving, whether it's getting out of bed, getting off the couch, or simply standing up and stretching, you prove to yourself that action is possible even when desire is low. This internal victory reinforces a belief that you are in control of your behavior, that you are capable of taking charge of your state. Over time, this belief solidifies into identity. You start to see yourself not as someone who waits for motivation to act, but as someone who uses action to create motivation. Even low-intensity movement, like walking outdoors, has been shown to dramatically improve mood, increase cognitive flexibility, and enhance creative thinking. And when you combine movement with sunlight exposure, something that can increase serotonin and further support dopamine production, you create a physiological environment in your body that is primed for productivity, motivation, and clarity. This is why so many thinkers, leaders, and creators use movement as a daily ritual. It's not about achieving a certain physique, it's about cultivating a state of mind that allows for consistent, high-quality effort. Movement also helps regulate the emotional centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala, which plays a key role in fear, anxiety, and avoidance behavior. When we're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or stressed, the natural tendency is to freeze or shut down. But movement provides a physical way to interrupt that loop. It sends a signal that we are not stuck, that we are in control, and that we can direct our attention and energy where it's needed. This can be incredibly empowering, especially for those who struggle with low mood or motivational fatigue. It becomes a tool, a lever, that can be pulled at will to change the emotional and psychological climate of the moment. In moments when mental discipline feels hard to access, physical movement becomes a kind of backdoor into motivation. You don't need to think your way into a motivated state, you can move your way into it. This is especially important in the modern world, where so much of our lives are spent sitting, scrolling, watching, and passively consuming. The human body was never meant to be so still, and the motivational systems of the brain were not designed for a sedentary existence. They evolved in tandem with physical effort, chasing, foraging, building, exploring. When we remove movement from our lives, we sever one of the key pathways to drive and desire. But when we reintroduce movement, even in small doses, we begin to awaken those systems again. It doesn't have to be intense. The key is intentionality. A 5-minute walk, a few stretches, a short burst of jumping jacks, all of these can be enough to tip the scales from inertia to activation. And once activation begins, the entire motivational engine of the brain starts to turn. You begin to feel capable, ready, even enthusiastic about the next task. And the more often you practice this, the more quickly your brain learns to associate movement with motivation, creating a self-sustaining loop that supports consistent action. Ultimately, movement is not a luxury. It is a biological requirement for sustained motivation. It is the language of action, the signal to the brain that we are ready to pursue, to engage, to create. When you begin to use movement as a deliberate tool, not just something you do when you feel good, but something you do to feel good, you gain access to one of the most powerful, natural, and reliable sources of motivation available to you. It doesn't require talent. It doesn't require belief. It just requires a willingness to start, to move, and to trust that the brain will follow. And once it does, everything changes. ChatGPT said, the language you use with yourself, your internal dialogue, has a direct and measurable impact on your levels of motivation. We often think of motivation as something that comes from external sources, inspirational videos, quotes, success stories. But some of the most powerful sources of motivation come from within, through the way you speak to yourself in moments of challenge, hesitation, or doubt. The nervous system doesn't just respond to the world around you, it responds profoundly to the words you use to interpret that world. And those words, repeated often enough, shape the very architecture of your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. Self-talk is not just a matter of attitude or positivity, it's a mechanism for regulating your neurochemistry. When you use affirming, clear, and directive language with yourself, you activate brain circuits involved in planning, goal setting, and emotional regulation. Conversely, when your self-talk is filled with doubt, criticism, or vagueness, you trigger stress circuits in the brain that are linked to the amygdala and other fear-based systems. This doesn't just influence your mood, it shapes your entire motivational state. That voice in your head can either be your greatest coach or your most destructive critic, depending on how consciously you use it. The key insight here is that language is a tool for directing attention. Where your attention goes, your energy flows. So when your internal dialogue says, "This is hard, I don't want to do this," your attention is being steered toward avoidance, your brain starts scanning for ways to reduce discomfort, and motivation dips. On the other hand, when your internal voice says, "This is hard, but I'm capable," or even, "Let's just start with the first step," your attention shifts to action. That small linguistic shift changes the orientation of your entire nervous system from one of retreat to one of engagement. There's a profound biological basis for this. The brain responds to language as if it were a real-world stimulus. If you say to yourself, "I can't do this," your body reacts as if that is a fact. Your heart rate might rise, your stress hormones may spike, and your focus narrows in an unhelpful way. But if you say, I've done hard things before, your brain reactivates memories of past success, and this triggers the release of neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin that support confidence and forward momentum. In other words, the way you speak to yourself can literally alter the chemical state of your brain and body, making motivation more or less accessible in real time. This becomes especially important in moments of friction, those instances when you're tempted to procrastinate, give up, or delay. In those critical moments, self-talk becomes the gateway to action. It's not about lying to yourself or pretending things are easy. In fact, the most powerful self-talk acknowledges difficulty while reinforcing capability. Saying, "This is going to be tough, but I've prepared for this," is far more effective than false positivity or denial. It grounds you in reality while orienting your mindset toward growth and perseverance. Moreover, the tone and structure of your internal dialogue matter. Research shows that using second-person language, saying, "You can do this," instead of "I can do this," can actually increase performance and motivation. This subtle shift creates a sense of distance from your immediate emotional state and activates the brain's problem-solving circuits more effectively. It's almost like stepping outside of yourself and becoming your own coach. You gain perspective, clarity, and a sense of direction. This technique has been used by elite athletes, military operators, and high performers across disciplines to push through challenges and maintain consistency under pressure. Another technique rooted in neuroscience is what's called implementation intention, a form of self-talk that outlines what you'll do in response to obstacles. Instead of simply saying, "I will stay motivated," you say, "If I feel tired, I'll take a 5-minute walk and then return to my task." This kind of language creates a contingency plan for your brain, which reduces uncertainty and makes it more likely that you'll follow through. It builds in resilience. The brain thrives on clarity, and giving it clear, actionable instructions through language enhances your ability to stay on course even when motivation dips. It's also crucial to understand that self-talk is not just for emergencies or crises, it's a daily practice. Like physical training, the more you engage in intentional internal dialogue, the more fluent and automatic it becomes. Over time, your default voice, your automatic thoughts begin to shift. They become more aligned with your goals, your values, and your best self. And this alignment creates a baseline of internal motivation that is less dependent on mood or circumstance. You no longer need to wait for perfect conditions to act. You've conditioned your mind to support action, even when it's uncomfortable. There is also an emotional healing aspect to self-talk. Many people carry the residue of past failures, criticisms, or limiting beliefs that were planted by others. Through conscious self-talk, you begin to rewrite those narratives. You replace voices of judgment with voices of encouragement. You build an inner environment that nurtures growth rather than punishes mistakes. This doesn't mean avoiding responsibility, it means approaching yourself with the same respect, compassion, and challenge you would offer to someone you deeply care about. That kind of self-respect is a powerful source of motivation because it creates internal alignment. When your inner voice supports your actions instead of undermining them, you become exponentially more capable of sustaining effort over time. Ultimately, motivation is not just about intensity, it's about consistency. And consistency is built through systems. Your self-talk is one of the most critical systems you have. It is always with you, always running in the background, shaping your focus, your beliefs, and your behaviors. When you take control of that system, when you start speaking to yourself with clarity, intention, and encouragement, you unlock a deeper, more sustainable form of motivation. One that doesn't depend on fleeting emotion, but on a steady inner voice that says again and again, "You've got this. Keep going. One step at a time." Sleep is often treated as a passive state, a time when the body rests and the mind shuts off. But from the perspective of neuroscience and performance, sleep is one of the most active and essential components of building, sustaining, and enhancing motivation. When we talk about motivation, whether it's the drive to pursue long-term goals, the focus to complete daily tasks, or the emotional energy to overcome obstacles, we are ultimately talking about brain function. And the brain cannot function optimally without high-quality sleep. In fact, without sufficient and consistent sleep, the very neural circuits and chemical systems that generate motivation begin to falter, leading to procrastination, apathy, low energy, and even depression. Sleep directly affects the brain's ability to regulate dopamine, the neurotransmitter most closely linked to motivation, reward, and drive. During deep sleep, especially during slow-wave and REM sleep, the brain recalibrates dopamine receptor sensitivity, cleans out metabolic waste, and resets the balance of neuromodulators. This means that when you wake up after a night of high-quality sleep, your brain is essentially recharged with a clean slate of motivation potential. You're more responsive to rewards, more willing to engage in effortful tasks, and more emotionally resilient in the face of stress. On the flip side, sleep deprivation leads to a measurable decrease in dopamine signaling, impairing your ability to feel motivated even when there's a compelling reason to act. But the impact of sleep on motivation isn't just biochemical, it's also cognitive. Sleep is essential for executive function, the brain's capacity for planning, decision-making, impulse control, and working memory. These are the very skills you rely on when you're trying to resist distractions, stay focused on long-term goals, and maintain effort over time. When you're sleep-deprived, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for these functions, becomes less active and less efficient. That's why, after a poor night of sleep, even simple tasks can feel overwhelming, and the desire to procrastinate or give up becomes much harder to resist. It's not a character flaw, it's a neurological impairment caused by inadequate rest. There's also a deep connection between sleep and emotional regulation, which is intimately tied to motivation. The ability to stay motivated is not just about raw energy, it's about managing frustration, anxiety, and setbacks. When you don't get enough sleep, the amygdala, the brain's fear and emotion center, becomes hyperactive, while the prefrontal cortex becomes less able to regulate those emotional impulses. This imbalance makes small challenges feel like major threats and causes a decrease in optimism and confidence. In this state, even the idea of beginning a task can feel emotionally overwhelming. But after just one night of sufficient sleep, the brain returns to balance, and what once felt impossible starts to feel manageable again. Another critical way sleep supports motivation is through memory consolidation and learning. When you're working toward a goal, whether it's learning a new skill, building a habit, or striving toward a professional milestone, your brain needs to process and integrate new information. This process doesn't happen while you're awake, it happens during sleep. In particular, REM sleep strengthens the neural connections formed during the day, stabilizing them and preparing them for future use. Without this nightly consolidation, your brain begins to lose efficiency. You forget what you've learned, you lose context for your goals, and progress begins to feel elusive. This lack of progress can lead to a feedback loop of discouragement and demotivation. Consistent sleep routines also create psychological momentum. When you go to bed and wake up at regular times, your body and brain begin to anticipate cycles of energy and recovery. This consistency reduces mental friction, improves alertness during the day, and supports the formation of productive habits. In contrast, irregular sleep patterns create unpredictability in your energy levels, leading to inconsistent motivation and effort. You may feel great one day and completely drained the next, not because of what you did, but because your circadian rhythms are misaligned. Aligning your sleep-wake cycle with natural light patterns, limiting artificial light exposure at night, and waking at the same time each day are simple but profoundly effective ways to stabilize motivation. It's also important to recognize that not all sleep is equal. Quality matters as much as quantity. 6 hours of deep, uninterrupted sleep can often be more restorative than 8 hours of fragmented, restless sleep. Practices like limiting caffeine late in the day, minimizing screen time before bed, and keeping the bedroom cool and dark can all significantly improve sleep quality. These may seem like small adjustments, but they create the conditions for the brain to enter the deeper stages of sleep necessary for full neurological recovery. And it is during these deeper stages that the systems responsible for motivation, the dopaminergic pathways, the prefrontal cortex, the limbic system, are repaired, rebalanced, and optimized. Even short-term sleep deprivation has cumulative effects. Skipping sleep for 1 or 2 nights might feel manageable, but each night of poor rest compounds the problem. Sleep debt builds up, and with it, your brain's capacity for motivation diminishes. You might notice yourself becoming more reactive, more pessimistic, or more likely to avoid effortful tasks. These aren't signs of laziness, they're signs that your brain is asking for recovery. Reclaiming your sleep is not just about avoiding burnout, it's about enhancing your ability to engage with life fully, to pursue goals consistently, and to maintain a sense of purpose and drive even when things get hard. In a world that often glorifies hustle, late nights, and grinding through fatigue, prioritizing sleep might feel like a luxury or even a weakness. But neuroscience makes it clear, sleep is not a barrier to success, it is the foundation of it. Every hour of deep, quality sleep is an investment in the clarity, focus, resilience, and motivation you need to do hard things and stay consistent in the face of obstacles. It's not just about how you feel, it's about how your brain functions. And when your brain functions at its best, your capacity for motivation, discipline, and long-term success expands dramatically. Sleep is your brain's way of recharging its motivational engine. The more you protect it, the further you can go. Your environment is not just the space you exist in. It is a dynamic system that constantly interacts with your brain and body, influencing your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in subtle but profound ways. When it comes to motivation, many people think the challenge lies entirely within, something to be fixed with willpower, mindset, or discipline. But science shows us that the external environment plays a critical role in either enhancing or diminishing our motivation. In fact, the spaces we inhabit and the stimuli we're exposed to on a regular basis can either act as fuel for action or as friction that saps our energy and focus. The brain evolved to respond to environmental cues. Every object, sound, color, and even the layout of a room sends signals to your nervous system about what is possible, what is expected, and what is rewarding. For instance, a cluttered desk filled with distractions like your phone, multiple tabs open on your computer, and visual noise will increase cognitive load. This means your brain has to work harder just to maintain focus, let alone generate the motivation to begin a task. On the other hand, a clean, organized, and intentionally arranged environment reduces mental friction and invites action. When your brain perceives order in your surroundings, it is more likely to adopt a sense of readiness and clarity internally. One of the key aspects of an environment that affects motivation is the presence or absence of cues related to your goals. If your environment constantly presents reminders of comfort, entertainment, or avoidance, like a TV remote on the couch, food on the counter, or social media notifications, you are repeatedly being nudged toward instant gratification. These environmental cues are powerful because they hijack the dopamine system, directing your brain toward short-term rewards rather than long-term goals. This is not about weakness or lack of willpower, it's about neurobiology. Your environment is shaping your behavior before you even make a conscious decision. Conversely, when you design your environment to support your goals, you drastically increase your chances of following through. Simple changes, like placing your workout clothes where you can see them, removing distracting apps from your phone, keeping a journal or planner visible on your desk, or having a dedicated workspace, can serve as physical prompts that reinforce your intentions. These cues act like silent coaches, guiding your attention and behavior in the right direction. They reduce the need for constant internal motivation by making the desired behavior the default option. When motivation dips, it is often the structure of your environment that will determine whether you stay on track or veer off course. The social aspect of your environment is equally important. The people you surround yourself with, whether physically or digitally, have a massive influence on your motivation. Human beings are social creatures, and our brains are wired for mirroring, empathy, and emotional contagion. This means you unconsciously absorb the attitudes, energy, and habits of those around you. If your environment includes people who are negative, aimless, or resistant to growth, that emotional tone will seep into your own mindset. But if you're around people who are focused, disciplined, and driven, even if only through online communities or content, you'll find your own motivation rising to meet that standard. Even elements like lighting, temperature, and sound can have a surprising impact on motivation. Natural light, for example, helps regulate your circadian rhythm, which influences your energy levels and mood throughout the day. A well-lit room in the morning can promote alertness, while dim or artificial lighting can increase lethargy. Similarly, certain types of music or ambient noise can enhance focus and motivation, especially when paired with tasks that require sustained effort. These environmental conditions don't just influence how you feel, they shape how your brain processes information, how quickly you fatigue, and how likely you are to persist in the face of difficulty. One of the most effective strategies for improving motivation is to create friction for the behaviors you want to reduce and remove friction for the behaviors you want to encourage. For example, if you want to limit social media use, keep your phone in another room, or use apps that block access during work periods. If you want to read more, leave a book on your pillow or next to your coffee mug. These environmental tweaks don't rely on motivation in the moment, they shape your behavior upstream, before the moment of decision even arises. Over time, these changes build momentum. They turn motivation from something you have to summon into something that's supported by the very space you live and work in. There's also a deeper psychological effect of a goal-oriented environment. It sends a signal to your identity. When your surroundings reflect your goals, they reinforce the idea that you are someone who follows through, who cares about growth, who is actively shaping their life. This identity reinforcement is powerful because identity is one of the strongest motivators of behavior. People tend to act in ways that are consistent with who they believe they are. So when your environment reflects order, clarity, and purpose, it helps solidify an internal identity aligned with those same values. In moments when motivation is low, most people look inward, searching for some spark of inspiration or energy. But often the most effective move is outward, changing the space around you to better support the person you want to become. This isn't about perfection, it's about intentionality. You don't need a perfectly designed office or a minimalist home. You just need an environment that is slightly more supportive than it is distracting, slightly more energizing than it is draining, slightly more aligned with your goals than with your comforts. Motivation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is a response, a byproduct of the systems and cues your brain is constantly processing. When you make the conscious choice to design your environment to support your effort, you gain a powerful ally in the pursuit of your goals. You stop relying solely on inner willpower and begin harnessing the external world to pull you forward. In doing so, motivation becomes less of a mystery and more of a system, one you can shape, control, and improve over time, simply by changing what surrounds you. Gratitude has long been associated with positive emotional states, but its effects on motivation are often overlooked. In reality, cultivating a mindset of gratitude is one of the most powerful ways to boost motivation, both in the short term and over the long haul. This is not just about feeling thankful for the good things in life, but about intentionally focusing your attention on the aspects of your life, goals, and efforts that are worthy of appreciation. Neuroscience has shown that gratitude engages several powerful brain circuits that enhance motivation, resilience, and overall well-being. It shifts the way your brain perceives challenges, rewards, and progress, making it easier to stay focused, consistent, and energized in your pursuit of goals. Gratitude works by increasing your brain's production of dopamine and serotonin, two key neurotransmitters associated with happiness, reward, and motivation. These chemicals are essential for driving motivation because they create a sense of pleasure and satisfaction when we engage in activities, work toward goals, and achieve milestones. By regularly practicing gratitude, you essentially train your brain to associate positive emotions with the process of working hard, pursuing challenges, and achieving progress. Instead of just waiting for external rewards or outcomes to provide motivation, gratitude teaches your brain to derive intrinsic satisfaction from the effort itself. It shifts the focus from the end result to the present moment, making the journey feel more rewarding and meaningful. One of the reasons gratitude is so effective in boosting motivation is that it counteracts one of the biggest barriers to sustained effort: negative thinking. When we are focused on what's lacking, what's not going well, or what we haven't yet achieved, motivation can quickly dwindle. We start to feel overwhelmed or discouraged by the gap between where we are and where we want to be. Gratitude interrupts this cycle by redirecting your focus toward what is going well. It reminds you of the small wins, the progress you've made, and the resources you already have at your disposal. This shift in perspective creates an emotional and mental framework that makes challenges seem more manageable and setbacks less discouraging. When you feel grateful for the progress you've made so far, you are far more likely to keep pushing forward. Gratitude also has a profound impact on resilience, the ability to recover from setbacks and continue pursuing your goals in the face of adversity. Resilience is a critical component of motivation because it's not the initial spark of inspiration that keeps you going, but rather the ability to stay motivated in the face of obstacles, failure, and frustration. Research has shown that people who practice gratitude are more likely to maintain a positive outlook and persevere when faced with difficulties. This is because gratitude fosters an optimistic mindset, which in turn enhances your ability to problem solve, stay focused, and maintain energy even when things aren't going as planned. Instead of being bogged down by negative emotions or self-doubt, gratitude allows you to see challenges as opportunities for growth, learning, and improvement. Furthermore, practicing gratitude strengthens your sense of agency, the belief that you can control your actions and influence your outcomes. Motivation is closely tied to a sense of agency. When we feel that our efforts are meaningful and that we have the power to shape our futures, motivation naturally rises. Gratitude enhances this sense of control by helping you acknowledge the positive impact of your own actions. When you express gratitude for the opportunities, resources, or skills you have, you are also recognizing that you have the power to make the most of them. This belief in your own ability to make a difference fuels motivation and encourages you to continue putting in effort toward your goals. Gratitude also creates a sense of connectedness and purpose, which are both essential drivers of motivation. When you take the time to reflect on what you're grateful for, it often involves recognizing the contributions of others, whether it's family, friends, mentors, or colleagues. This recognition fosters a deeper sense of social connection and belonging, which in turn increases your sense of purpose. Purpose is one of the most potent motivators because it ties your efforts to something larger than yourself. When you feel that your actions are part of a bigger picture, whether it's making a positive impact on others or contributing to a cause you believe in, motivation becomes more sustainable and powerful. In addition to its psychological and emotional benefits, gratitude has physical effects that support motivation. Chronic stress is one of the biggest motivation killers, as it drains energy, hampers cognitive function, and diminishes the brain's ability to process rewards and goals. Gratitude, however, has been shown to reduce the physical effects of stress by lowering cortisol levels and activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for relaxation and recovery. By reducing stress, gratitude helps maintain a positive emotional state, which in turn enhances motivation and focus. When you feel calmer, more centered, and more at ease, you are more likely to take productive action toward your goals. Incorporating gratitude into your daily routine doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as taking a few moments each day to reflect on the things you are thankful for, whether it's the opportunity to work toward a goal, the support of loved ones, or the skills you've developed. Writing down 3 things you're grateful for each day is a common practice that has been shown to have significant benefits for mental health and motivation. Another powerful technique is to express your gratitude to others, whether through verbal acknowledgement, written notes, or small acts of kindness. This not only enhances your own motivation, but also strengthens your relationships and builds a supportive environment that can further fuel your drive. Ultimately, gratitude transforms the way you experience progress. Instead of focusing on what you don't have or what you haven't yet accomplished, it helps you recognize the value of your current situation and the journey you're on. This shift in focus makes the pursuit of goals feel more enjoyable, sustainable, and meaningful. It also enhances the way you respond to challenges and setbacks, turning them into opportunities for growth rather than insurmountable obstacles. By cultivating gratitude, you're not only boosting your motivation in the present moment, but you're also building a strong foundation for long-term success, well-being, and fulfillment. Gratitude is a practice that over time creates a powerful feedback loop of motivation, positivity, and achievement.